a new leader or as a team leader are creating a team culture and kind of striking that balance between where your team is very effective, where your team can all come together and be thought partners, get the best ideas from everybody, versus we all just have to produce a lot of work. And I think product marketing is often a bucket where, yes, people just expect you to do a lot of things, especially when it's a little amorphous and ill-defined in the organization of what exactly does product marketing do here.
Hey guys, welcome to an episode of Spill the Marketing Beans, and today I'm going to talk to someone quite, I have been meaning to talk to for a while, and I've got like all these questions I want to ask him because he's made some very interesting turns in his career. And today we want to sort of dive into how you can go about setting up your product marketing team and what you should be looking for, and what would the career of a person who gets into product marketing would look like. Welcome, Brian. It's Brian Busch from Cloud Elements. He's Director of Product Marketing. Thank you so much for being a part of this, Brian.
Thank you, Ashar. I'm thrilled to join.
So let's get straight into it. So I know you did have a background in finance before, and then later somewhere down the line, there was that switch to product marketing, and now you are Director of Product Marketing. I know a lot of people sometimes are trying to figure out if they are already in one path, how do they make that transition to something like product marketing? So if you could just walk us through your journey and what worked for you.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned the finance piece. I was working in microfinance and was based in Latin America. I then went to business school for a couple of years, and there decided I really liked the challenge of trying to grow new businesses, specifically tech startups. I went to Berkeley, and so coming out of the program at Berkeley, I found myself looking for a role where I would learn a lot, and B, where I would say some leverage. And I joined at first in a really early stage, a 6-person startup, a new technology coming out of Berkeley. The company at the time was called Captricity, commercializing a new technology the founder had created. I ended up as the first sales and marketing hire. It was going to be a little marketing at first. It ended up being more of a sales role. But what I really enjoyed about that is I was frontline with customers, testing messaging every day. I became sort of the company expert on who were the competition, where would we win, where we would lose. And I realized I was doing a product marketing job, but without the title, without really, that. And I also, as much as I enjoyed selling, I enjoyed some of the business development and partnerships pieces, I didn't feel like I got a ton of leverage. I was learning a lot, but I wasn't getting sort of the leverage. I could control my deals. I could maybe feed some messaging back to the rest of the marketing team or to other sellers on the team, but it felt like I was, only had kind of my little piece of the world that I can control or contribute to. And, the company was becoming a much bigger sort of organism in that sense. So from there, I decided to focus on product marketing. I hadn't had the title, so I had to sort of talk to, as a seller, how I was doing the job. But we're marketers. You can spin a story, if you will. And so I ended up joining two growth stage companies who were just at that stage where they're hiring their first product marketer, but were growing, and really asked me to say, hey, figure out what this means for us at first, but then start to hire and grow the team from there. And I say two because I joined a company called Kapost that was sort of at that stage. The company was then acquired 2 years later. And so stepped into a very similar role with Cloud Elements. And again, kind of player coach at first, then start to hire and grow the team. And Cloud Elements was just acquired by UiPath as well. So that's been a little bit high level, my journey.
Okay, so I love how you mentioned you were already doing things like testing messaging and even learning a lot about customers, which I think is perfect. And, those are a couple of things that the product marketer has to have, as basics to get started. So, okay, so you are the Director of Product Marketing. So forming a product marketing team, what should that look like? Or in your opinion, what would that look like? What sort of core things would you look or would you factor in when setting up a product marketing team?
Yeah. Well, so I'll speak first to my experience. And I do think that there's a difference between when a company kind of says to you or to someone, hey, we know we need this function, but we need to define what it is, what it looks like. And by the way, it's going to be you first, and then we will grow from there. That's quite different than, say, stepping into a UiPath that has kind of what I would consider, if not the ideal, like a really solid structure in terms of what product marketing can or arguably should look like when it sort of grows up. So starting from kind of, you're the first person, build the function, define what it looks like. I do think that there is kind of always tension, or what I saw with Compose primarily, and then initially and then second with Cloud Elements, is really this tension between what does the company need today, most urgently, what's going to move the needle most, versus you as the new leader. How are you building towards a vision of something that you think is sustainable, that covers all the bases, that is very effective sort of at scale? And I feel like there's a lot of tension between those two things. And that's primarily like the main challenge I've seen when you're trying to truly build and define that function the first time, is prioritizing the product marketing team or your own as the product marketer's time. And I think that leads second into scope. What's the scope for the product marketing organization? So as an example, when I first joined when I first joined Compost, roughly the ask as a product marketer was, well, let's talk about our positioning. Are we still, is the messaging still solid? Do we need an update? And as I started to dive into what the analysts were saying, what the customers were saying, I realized that Compost was a marketing technology platform. Specifically, the analysts put us in a content marketing platform sort of category. But we realized that the customers we were serving, the problem we were solving, it didn't fit the analyst definition. We were always a niche player in their box, but we were hearing from customers there's a material problem around content operations that the software is actually solving. So what it became very quickly, it went from sort of a product marketing focused positioning exercise to, well, actually, broadly speaking for our marketing organization, is this the right branding for us? Is there a better way to think about the company? And we ended up sort of pivoting our brand and pivoting that positioning, which then became, we actually added on a services practice and built sort of a niche, we built a conceptual framework on how to think about this idea of content operations, and then a services practice around that. And so quickly it became, I, as the product marketer, we are launching a new services offering. And this is like a whole new product line for the company, but in a very different direction. So things sort of flow together. But that was something I could have, we had a lot of hard conversations about where to spend time, how to spend time. But second, through that, if I had come in and said, well, I have a tight scope around product marketing, and here's what I think it is, I probably never would have gotten into the branding piece of that. So that for me, there was a lot of tension, but also a lot of flow between sort of the prioritization and the scope of the organization. And the good news was, as scope grew, it brings up a lot of occasions where you have to say no to folks. So you've got to maintain a backlog. You've got to kind of do what you can where you can, but that then became sort of the ammunition to also argue for more resources. And that's how I started to grow the team. When we looked with leadership at the backlog, kind of with leadership saying, hey, you want scope to be X, but one person can't do X. So coming to them with a proactive proposal about here's how we should add headcount. Now I think there are even better resources around, like Product Marketing Alliance survey has some good data for you as a new leader to say, here's what comps look like, here's where I think we should add resources. In my case, it was, hey, talk to other product marketers. How are you staffed and hired? Folks who are a little bit bigger, and then bring that to leadership to help justify kind of adding resources to the team.
So when you add resources to the team, I know this is something that we actually had spoken about sometime before. When you are structuring your team, I feel like there are a couple of ways that you can do that. You can take the functions within product marketing and then have people specialize in those areas to form your team. Or maybe you can take someone who might be a good writer, or maybe as a junior product marketing executive to be a part of the team. How did you go about like structuring and forming that team?
Yeah, I think, back to that idea of, hey, what does the company need most now versus how are you building towards a vision? I'm also a little bit reminded of, who hires product marketing? And there's a nice little 2x2 matrix I saw somewhere, which is something roughly the size of the company and the complexity of your offering. And of course, if you're a big company with a complex offering, of course you have product marketing. And if you're just a big company, but not a very complex offering, you probably still have product marketing because you have a lot of specialists sort of in your marketing and your product org. Where I think it's really interesting is that like you're a younger or smaller company, but you have a complex offering. That's where people tend to hire product marketing early. And that's where I think I have generally looked for, as we discussed, more of a generalist. Somebody, you're not going to have the headcount or the resources early on to have somebody who specializes just say in analyst relations, or to have somebody who specializes just in your competitive intel, or who runs maybe your some of your industry overlay, in addition to the core product marketing for, say your core product or platform itself. So I've generally looked for folks who have a little bit more of a general background, but then try to, based on their strengths, sort of specialize. So one example with Kapos was we needed a lot of sales enablement, but we also wanted to, we had a broad product offering. We found that a lot of customers were only using a piece of the platform. So customer marketing, new launches, and driving feature adoption was a real priority for the company as well. And so as I started, as we became a team of 3, we were really thought partners, I would say, on the core messaging and positioning, and that's where you needed a generalist. But then, I took on more, say, the analyst relations and some of those, some of the overlay pieces, whereas I kind of had one team member really focused on the sales enablement with new, and kind of some of the metrics we had around driving new logos and new customer acquisition, versus somebody who was more focused on product launches, feature announcements, and working with the customer success team to try and drive feature adoption and therefore some of the upsell pieces. So it was based on company priorities that kind of dictated how we sort of allocated the time that we had available. But I think, as you can see, as we envisioned hiring more people, you would want to get to more of a specialist skill set. And I think that's a delicate sort of balance along the way. But if you come back to like, hey, you need to know your customers, you need to know the competition. And based on those two things, you have to pick and emphasize the differentiators. You're covering the core product marketing pieces along the way. So as long as you stay, I think, pretty focused on product marketing, call them sort of first principles, the allocation of time and resources, if you get generalist people who are smart, who can communicate well, who can think well, generally, I think you'll find you can also get folks who are flexible enough to kind of grow with the needs of the company along the way.
Okay, I love that. You actually answered the question that I had, which was also, which sort of functions would you prioritize and what you would think are like the nice to have. So you covered that as well. So here's actually another question that I had, Brian. Sometimes with a function like product marketing, yes, you could set like OKRs and metrics to measure how success you are, but a challenge I've seen personally is making sure product marketing as a function is more visible within the company. So was there anything that you did specifically with your team to ensure that the product marketing function was visible within the organization? Like everyone understood how valuable it was.
Yeah.
Any tips or anything that you've done that worked for you?
I think that is a really, I think that's a really big topic in general. I kind of, maybe I'll answer it as I think about it in terms of relationships with folks outside of product marketing.
Yeah.
Versus how, maybe how you are creating as a new leader or as a team leader are creating a team culture and kind of striking that balance between where your team is very effective, where your team can all come together and be thought partners, get the best ideas from everybody, versus like we all just have to produce a lot of work. And I think product marketing is often a bucket where, yes, people just expect you to do a lot of things, especially when it's a little amorphous and ill-defined in the organization of what exactly does product marketing do here. So I think there's also kind of how are you as a team being very efficient about producing the things that that you want to produce. And so as I think about the external piece, it's really about building relationships, right? Like you only, as a product marketer, you only get sort of that leverage. If you've done a lot of good work on that market or that messaging framework, but nobody uses it, it doesn't show up in campaigns, sellers can't use it to drive more business or drive their prospects through the funnel, it doesn't really have the impact you intended it to have. And so I do think there's a lot of getting out there for the outside outside the team sort of side of this, like proactively trying to build relationships. And that often means asking folks what they need to be successful. And that occasions a lot of requests. It occasions a lot of, hey, if we had a slide on X, or if we had a deck speaking to this, or why don't we have a customer study that's in my specific, little industry. And so then from there, I do think you've got to manage a good backlog, keep track of those, socialize ideas early when you're bringing something new. Also, assume good intent. I feel like very quickly, especially as an early product marketing team, you just find yourself full. Like there are not enough hours in the day amongst the whole team to do everything that folks are asking for. And yet the asks keep coming. So yes, you've got to manage a backlog, but there's also, at times I find myself a little bit like, oh man, they're asking for something that's just really silly. But I end up basically thinking to myself, I should probably act on half of those asks. Like not all of them, you have to say no a lot. But if my gut is to say no to almost all of them, like there's probably half of them I actually should take on and find a way to work in. Because, that's how you build trust. That's how you build some relationships. So, I think externally, it's really important to kind of show that you are listening to folks and that you are trying to act on their ask as you are building towards your vision. Whereas internally to the team, I think it's a little more about empowering or taking a lens of empowerment towards your team. And so that means, I think, really figuring out and asking your team, what are their strengths? Yeah. Where do they want to focus and grow? Like I said, it's about building a team culture of, hey, we are going to be transparent about now. These are the times where we need to all come together and hash through some ideas, versus these are the times where let's build, as a manager, it's sometimes kind of like, let's protect your time so that when it comes time to execute, you as a person on the team can be absolutely as efficient or as effective as possible. As a manager, that also, I think, thinking about the whole person, making sure that they can sort of bring their best selves to work, and recognizing that, hey, if there's something going on in their lives, family-wise, that is preventing them from doing their best work, trying to be accommodating. Obviously, we've seen a lot of this, I think, over the past year with the pandemic. Folks have, we have all had to be a little more flexible. And lastly, I think as a manager, it's a little bit about recognizing your own biases. And at times that means I have a preference for this style of work, and somebody may have a very different work style. And I do think that stepping into the manager role, you have to think about accommodating your employees and how they fit into the culture, rather than just saying, well, I like this style, therefore the team's going to do X, and that's sort of the end of discussion. So, I think about those two things of like, how are you building team culture versus how is your team showing up externally to the rest of the organization?
Okay, so I love that, making sure that, you help the team play to their strengths. So along those lines, Brian, what would say the career path of like a product marketer, a successful one, would typically look like? I mean, we know that it could go from like product marketing to senior product marketing, but what sort of like avenues do you see, and on what sort of avenues would you like encourage people to like take on as they, succeed as a product marketer?
Yeah. As any good question, it all depends, right? And I think where it depends most is for each individual, you've got to think about what's the career you really want to build. And I do think I see folks who decide they really like the function of product marketing, and they kind of, then it's about maybe working through the leadership roles of within the product marketing function. And there, I think you do need to get some experience being the product marketer on the core product or platform. You need to get some experience around, talking to customers, whether it's win-loss churn calls or on, something of a customer evidence and case studies program, if that's within scope for your function, some analyst relations, owning some competitive intel on the line. Like, I think if for folks who really like the function of product marketing, you sort of need to build out the base of experience within that, as well as thinking about how you're going to kind of build your own skills as a manager. Whereas I've seen a lot of folks who say product marketing is an interesting step along my path towards maybe it's more of general marketing leadership. In which case you need to get a good sort of view of product marketing itself, but then you will also need to collaborate closely and understand the demand gen side of things. You will also need to understand content production and the branding side of marketing generally. Or there are folks who, see product marketing as one step along to more of a product leadership role. And that then gets you obviously much closer to, well, how are you taking customer needs and using those to determine what to build? How are you building relationships with product? And how are you leading the launch of new features and new products from there? So I do think it depends, and it depends on the type of career that somebody wants to build. But, I hope we all are in the position as much as possible to think about career from how does it fulfill you as a person? And I like some of this research. It goes more into the psychology side of things, which I think we as marketers ultimately where it's about persuasion, it's about communication. And so I really, I think kind of being curious around just the human psychology and some of that research is really important. But some of the research around what does it mean to be fulfilled goes to like, where do you know your strength and where do you have the opportunity, I think, to express those strengths? And so that gets to things like, well, the function, product marketing, what you do on a day-to-day basis. But it also means things like you generally build some subject matter expertise around the industry or around the product category that you're in. And that can be something that you can either, folks can be really fulfilled by learning a new product category in a new industry, or folks can be really fulfilled by saying, you know what, I have some expertise in this and I want to leverage that expertise to really just help the next company and the next company be really wildly successful.
Speaking of quoting some of the resources that you mentioned, what sort of resources would you recommend in terms of maybe books or maybe forums to look at, PMMs could kind of look at in order to upskill themselves, or even for PMM leaders?
Yeah, well, we met through the Product Marketing Alliance, and I think that is becoming a fantastic resource. A lot of primary research they're putting out that, again, kind of gives, especially me as oftentimes kind of coming in as the only product marketer or then leading kind of the small team of product marketers, gives me a good, what are other people thinking? What are they saying? Kind of, how does that match up with my perspective of reality? But, from a framework standpoint, I think they're strong, but there's pragmatic marketing, there's serious decisions. I'm sure there's a few others. So, I think there are some good resources. It's a little bit more to find, A, something that works for you personally, and two, works for your organization. Then I think, hey, are you a student of marketing and a student of great products? And there are tons of resources out there from both. And, most of us these days, we're also getting sold a lot. There's a ton of people reaching out to us. So it's always interesting seeing hey, on the stuff you're receiving inbound, what do you think is working? What do you think isn't? Me personally, I don't respond to a lot of those emails, but I immediately go over to somebody's website when they've reached out and I look at what they're talking about. I look at how kind of, not just how that individual seller, but how the company themselves are representing, what sorts of tactics and technologies they're using to try and gain some of my attention, so on and so forth. And also, stay close to the product leaders who, I think sometimes I've seen lately product marketing for me has been a little bit more skewed to the marketing side of things. I have to intentionally focus on like, what are the good product leaders doing? What are good product companies doing? Just try and, stay curious and stay interested on some of those. So there's a ton of good podcasts and things. There's books. The resources kind of, get innumerable. One just that comes to mind recently that I like is a podcast called 99% Invisible, which is really more around design and on a product side of things. Okay. But again, sort of, I feel like I see a lot of inbound marketing pieces. I have to more proactively go search out some of the resources around more of the product side. And then lastly, I think as a leader, again, as we went back to, how are you just becoming something of a student of management, of technology products in general? I enjoyed Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I like some of Brad Feld's, blogs and books and things like that.
Sure. So if there's any final advice that you wanted to impart to, like, say, product marketing leaders, what would that be? Any final one to impart it? I
feel like the first thing I learned with that company, Captricity, I mentioned, that was a very early stage startup, is I often came in with a ton of strong opinions. I had done my work, I had done my research, and I said to the CEO, the leaders, whomever, like, here's what we should do. Over several years, and we grew that company fairly well, raised several rounds. The last, I think, was 35 million. We were doing $10 million of revenue by the time I left, and this was from starting at zero. I realized it just has to work. It doesn't have to work the way that I necessarily think it should. And I think if you blow that out just a little bit, like, instead of starting from the premise of I'm right, I've done the research, here's what I think is right. Like, let's start from the premise of that is wrong. I have done the research, I have done good work, and it's still wrong. So how do we get to less wrong faster? And I do think if you just flip that of like, hey, whatever I think, it's either going to change or I'm going to be missing something or somewhere it's wrong. Like, let's find the holes. Let's find how we disprove that and iterate on it faster, whether it's a messaging framework, whether it's a go-to-market strategy, whether it's our competitive analysis, whatever it is. I think if you take the attitude of let's get less wrong, it's the nice mindset flip that I think keeps you a little more humble, helps you listen a little bit better to folks, and generally keeps you in better stead in terms of just making your organization successful.
Cool. I love that. Let's get less wrong. That's a good one. Thanks a lot, Brian. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it. And I know that it's going to be very helpful for anyone who is leading or even being a part of a product marketing team. So thank you so much for taking the time, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, Ashara. Thank you for having me. This has been a pleasure.